What you're looking at is a pile of dice used for Fantasy Flight Games' new line of Star Wars role-playing games. Now, before you get too excited, this large pile of dice represents 3 sets, which is the number that I think is appropriate. Now, you might feel differently. You might want more dice. You might think that fewer dice are required. I felt that 3 gave me enough dice that with the players and the characters that I currently have, I don't have to re-roll anything to complete a die pool. Now, this also means that I have too many of some kinds of these dice and just the right number of others. So as the characters become more capable, I may start desiring an additional set. But at this point in time, I think it's unlikely. The way die pools are calculated means that you really aren't putting a lot of the same type of dice into the pool, at least not very often. This really isn't the kind of game where each player would have their own discrete set of dice. The way that the game works, the player who's actually rolling is going to have dice contributed to their pool by the game master, dice contributed to their pool by other characters, players who are in the scene, who are assisting in some way. And so having a large pile of dice in the center of the table is really the culture of play that seems to be dictated by this style. So, let's talk about the dice. One of the aspects of play is that the die pools are built around the concept of rolling and totaling successes, but also canceling out opposing symbols. So, for example, these D6s are boost dice in the blue and setback dice in black. The dice have blanks, the dice have doubles, and the dice have opposing symbols. So on the blue die right now, you see on the top face an explosion, which is canceled out on the top face of the black die by this triangular shape. The explosion is a success. The triangular shape is a failure. Now on these other faces, we have this symbol. This symbol is the symbol for advantage, and it's canceled out by the symbol for threat. Boost dice are all those little things which give your character that little extra boost. You know, do they have good equipment? Are they getting help? Or, whatever. Setbacks are the opposite. Things that are making this particular task difficult right now. A lack of time, poor equipment, shaky footing. You get the idea. These are the next pair of dice. These are D8s. So we have the skill dice and we have the difficulty dice. Now, tasks basically have an inherent difficulty for something very specific, which you'll find, detailed in the book, or the game master adjudicates what the difficulty should be. And this is stated openly, and the group can discuss it somewhat, but basically control of difficulty is up to the game master. Control of advantages or disadvantages like these are more in the hands of the players, plus some other tricks that they can try. Now, the skill die, this really is the core of the die pool. Right? So, pools are built by looking at a character's characteristic, their attributes, and their ranks in a relevant skill. So, let's say that we're talking about perception. Right? Now, the player gets to choose the higher of the two things, the characteristic or the skill. Let's say for the moment that the characteristic, the attribute, was higher, and let's say that was a 3. That person would then take 3 of the skill die to form the basis of their pool. But let's also say they have a rank in perception. They have, level 1 in the perception skill. That will allow them to trade back one of these skill dice for what's called a proficiency die. And you'll note that the proficiency die is a D12. Okay? And what sets it apart, other than having more faces from the skill die, is that it also has one of these symbols on it. This top face is marked by the triumph symbol. So while the skill dice has multiples of success, or a single success, or advantage, or multiples of advantage, right? The proficiency die has all of those, plus this supreme level of success, the triumph. We'll get into it more later. Now the skill die, are balanced out by the difficulty dice, which are built much the same way, right? With advantage and threat canceling and success and failure canceling. Okay. So a normal task would have a difficulty of 2, right? And with our aforementioned perception check, this is the base die pool, to which boosts for advantageous conditions, situations, equipment, what have you, could be added, and to which setbacks for the opposite would be added. So let's say that through use of good equipment, and because it's raining and the character's under stress and lacking time, this is the die pool. What would happen is that this pool would be rolled. Right. Now, the boost die turned up a blank. It's just gone. We have 2 advantage here. We have another advantage and a success. We have 2 more successes. So that's pretty exciting. So the player is starting to imagine how successful they're going to be. However, we also get a threat and a failure and another failure. So failures cancel successes. So these 2 failures are gone, and these 2 successes are gone. Now what do we have left? We have a threat, and we have 3 advantages. So one of my advantages goes away, which means this face gets turned to just leave a success. And this is my final result. And this is where the fun of the narrative dice really begins. Leading up to this point of receiving this result, which requires interpretation and a lead-in to the narration, we've had an in-character, as much as possible, discussion about the scene. Right? What are all the factors that are affecting this roll? And carrying on from that discussion, we get the roll and then smoothly segue into the interpretation. Now, this isn't a question of just succeeding. This is a question of succeeding with a certain degree of advantage. So I, as the game master and the player also contributing, can just focus on what that would be, rather than having to sit and evaluate the mood of the table, perhaps, or, what's a realistic response, or all the things that we normally do with a simple numerical result, or a simple number of successes result. This is a part of normal game mastery, but having it externalized in this way not only brings in surprises or pushes you in directions that you might not consider with such ease, it also, relieves you of some of the burden of having to make a decision about how the game is going to go. It's not always going to come up this positively. It could wind up with a failure result, of course, just as easily. And it's out of your hands. It's obvious, it's on the table, and you can just enjoy interpreting those results. Let's look at the rest of the dice. What we haven't seen yet is the challenge die. Now, the challenge die is an augment for the difficulty die. And like the player gets to augment their skill dice to proficiency dice, the game master gets to augment difficulty dice and make them into challenge dice, taking away one and supplying another. They can do this basically when it seems appropriate, when a threat isn't just, a couple of low-ranking stormtroopers in a hallway, but something more significant, like when one of the players starts screaming Boba Fett over and over again in a high-pitched voice. The last die to look at is the Force die. This doesn't have a lot of impact in play unless you have a Force-using character, but it does have significant impact at the beginning of play because rolling it, one for each character, determines what's called the destiny pool, the flow or the ebb and flow of the Force around the character and around the group as a whole. So everybody rolls and the results are totaled. And you notice that there are black dots and there are white dots on the die in varying numbers. And it really is as simple as that. Dark Force points or light side Force points. The characters, the players, can spend the light side points. The Game Master can spend the dark side points against them to affect pools or otherwise interfere with situations. So, if a light side point is spent, the Game Master gets a dark Force point to spend later. And the reverse is true. If the Game Master spends a dark Force point, the group gains a light Force point that they can spend later. Right? May the Force be with you. So that's kind of cool. So that's rolled at the beginning of the game, and at the beginning of every session, this pool is re-rolled and refreshed. So it, of course, encourages you to use up that pool as much as you can during play. So those are all the dice, and that's the basic mechanic for how they operate together. One of the concerns about the dice that I myself shared until I bought the core rules and talked to others who had played it is, what do I do if I don't have the dice? What do I do if I can't get the dice? What do I do if I lose the dice? That kind of thing. Well, inside the core book, early on, in the description of the system, it lists out a chart. The chart not only explains what all the symbols are, it explains what the die types are and the distribution of the symbols on the faces. Meaning, you can print out your own images and attach them to existing dice. You can order blank dice and, pen them in. You can order custom dice and print them up yourself. I suppose in this dawning age of 3D printing, you could just make them, and so on and so forth. It also gives you a chart so that you can simply use normal polyhedrals to play the game. So instead of having the advantage symbol, you have a range of numbers on a D8 that equals advantage, and so on. So a little harder, not as fast to play, but still a possibility. Last, there is an excellent app available for Android, and I presume for the other format, but I don't know, so don't quote me on that. That not only allows you to, have 3D representations of dice and full run of how you actually use them at the table. I mean, it operates just like having a pool of dice. It also gives you the custom dice for the X-Wing miniatures game. Now, this is a paid app. It's just under $5 at the time of filming. This may be too much for you, or it may be just right, or it may be the answer to prayer because you cannot find dice anywhere around you and can't order them. So, your mileage will also vary on that. But for all of these reasons, I feel like not trying the game because there are custom dice involved is a legitimate concern, but there are legitimate responses to that concern. Another point which is raised is the cost of buy-in. And, well, again, this is going to vary by group, but it's not an insignificant concern. Now, I was able to get Edge of the Empire for less than $60. There's no PDF available, so what you're getting is the book. This is a huge book, very dense. I've shown the inside of it before. It's easy to read. It's very clear. It clearly benefited from the unusual beta process that they went through. But I find that it presents a very normal system in a very clear way. The normal system is incredibly well augmented by the existence of these dice and the use of these dice. And if you have any questions about how the gameplay works, you can find the answers and fantastic art in the core book. It's definitely, a good investment if you like Star Wars, if you like Star Wars role-playing, and if, this kind of system is for you. For buy-in, the cost of the core book is pretty normal. Cost of the dice is a little exorbitant because you probably, if you are a regular role player, already have all the dice you're ever going to need, and probably all the dice a small town living next to you is going to need. But, I don't know. For me, there's always room for more dice. What would I consider to be essential? As I mentioned earlier, 3 sets of dice seems right to me. The core book, you'll need it because you can't get it on PDF. The Game Master screen, I am not a real user of screens, but this is a pretty good one. It includes, a quick look at the dice, what the symbols mean, has the difficulty levels right there, attack difficulties, ranged modifiers, ranged weapons list, including, cost and all the special effects and that sort of thing, weapon qualities, like, will it cause knockdown? Is it a guided weapon? That sort of thing. The critical injury chart, the maneuvers, and vehicle critical hits. So all the really useful stuff that I might fumble through the book for is inside the chart, or inside the screen. The other side of the screen is pretty impressive, although I've never really been a big fan of name of the game in bold letters on one whole panel. I just want art. But, there you go. It's not bad. When I broke the screen out at the first session, it got some oohs and ahs and, got some excitement going. I put it away about a minute later, and I didn't need to reference it once. I would have dragged it out again if combat had actually happened, but the characters, thanks to the coolness of the narrative dice and the way that they took task resolution, avoided all the combat encounters that headed their way. I don't know if that trend will continue with what's in store for them in the next session, but we'll see. The screen, which I consider to be very much optional, was, if I remember correctly, just under $20. So that takes us to $70 if you want the screen. But then there's the dice, and these range in price depending on where you're getting them from. I can't really give you a quote on those. So it is likely possible, if you're going to get 3 sets, the core book and the screen, that you might get up around the $100 range. That's a high buy-in, I think, from anybody's point of view. Going in as a group on the dice can definitely mitigate that. Now, inside the screen, you also get something that they've called the Game Master's Kit. I made fun of this before because it doesn't really seem to be one. It was just a screen, I said. Well, the Game Master's Kit is actually a 32-page book, which has in it an adventure, some advice about running the adventure, and honestly, that's it. There's nothing wrong with this. The screen itself is very well made, very attractive. I like it. I'm satisfied with it. The only thing that bothers me is the term Game Master's Kit. It simply isn't. If it come with dice or more GM advice or something, I might have less of a problem with it. But anyway, screen's worth it. Totally optional. This booklet, whatever. Edge of the Empire. Very satisfied with the book, the way it's written, and so far, satisfied with how it works in play. Much easier to use than it looks, much quicker to get a grip on, even for people who have never used dice pools before, than I thought. Is it expensive? Yes. Do you love Star Wars? Do you want to play this game? Does this excite you? It may be worth it.